These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs.
Tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal, Television for Agricultural Business Decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Bryce, and thank you for joining us today on Market Journal. This week we've got some advice when it comes to nitrogen savings. We'll check out some new robotic innovations from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and get you caught up on the latest trends that are impacting the markets. Plus, as always, Eric Hunt is standing by with your latest weather forecast. All of that is coming your way here on Market Journal, but let's begin the broadcast right here. Back in 2017, Wheat Stem Maggot caused significant damage to several cornfields around Nebraska. This summer, some producers and crop consultants in areas of the state have been dealing with young corn plants being impacted by wheat stem maggot once again. Market Journal recently caught up with a Nebraska Extension educator to learn more about how this could be impacting your fields.
Yeah, here's like another, oh man, that plant's almost normal minus the fact that this has come off, but look at how big those leaves are, and, you know, a tiller coming out on that one. Well, you know, to start with this issue, you probably have to go back a decade or so, when Wayne Onesor started seeing corn plants that their main stem was not growing. In fact, they looked like they'd been destroyed. Something had killed the main part of that plant, the new and emerging whorl. And so that was over a decade ago, and then about 8 years ago, this issue happened again, but over a much more widespread area. We went out and did a survey of about 13 fields in mostly the south central part of the state. And gathered a lot of information on what on earth was going on that wheat stem maggot would be showing up and damaging corn. And it turns out from that survey, a lot of what we were seeing was wheat or rye cover crops terminated after planting. So they were green planting their corn into a cover crop. And the maggots were on the cover crop. That's not unusual in wheat stem maggot. It's normally on wheat, rye, and oats. But because this host was killed, it had nowhere to go. And so it moved off the wheat or rye cover crops and onto the corn to complete its development. And they were all different sizes when we did the survey in terms of the larval size, but they were all feeding in that growing point of that plant, killing the inner leaf, the emerging leaf that was there. So it was a troubling situation because there was plants that were stunted and way behind in producing tillers and some normally developing plants. But one of the critical things we found in this survey that is really important to everybody who's potentially managing this pest is that we didn't find wheat stem maggot infestations outside of where the cover crop was growing. So it had to be within about 1 foot to 2 feet of where a cover crop plant was growing. And so you'd say, oh, okay, so what? But it's really important to the fact that adults are not the source of infestation, that it was larval movement from the cover crop that caused infestation in the corn. And so we're seeing a repeat of that this year in quite a number of fields across the state. And then right in the next row, just 2 feet away, they look perfect. There's one plant right there, and that's it. There's not much to be done right now. I know some producers are discussing and consultants are discussing or using an insecticide, trying to kill them in the whorls of the corn plant. And I would say there's a couple reasons why we don't probably want to do that. First is we're not likely to save the corn plants that are already infested. And second, if the goal is to prevent new infestations, they're not likely to occur if they're already in the corn. So the insect's only likely to move if the host dies. So it's likely to complete its development within the corn plant it's in. The third item is that there's a lot of beneficial insects out there in these systems, and if we apply insecticides to that system, we can wipe them out, and then we can potentially get secondary pest issues that can be kind of problematic. And they might find themselves back out there when they don't want to be controlling some other pest. As we've heard anywhere from low infestations of 11%, 5%, or 1%, all the way up to 50 to 60%. Those 50 to 60%, those growers are struggling with what do I do with this crop? Do I terminate the crop and replant? Some are just replanting. They don't, it looks too bad to them to consider leaving it in the field. What we learned from 2017 survey was that these tillered plants, if they produce a tiller, that's a productive tiller. So most people, what they know of tillers when they think about corn growth and development is a tiller is something that's wasted at the end of the season. It produces a tassel ear, so there's nothing covering the ear and the ears are diseased. But in this case, they actually produced normal ears. And so it's not the full yield potential that existed in that field for that plant, but it's close enough that those plants should be considered part of the live count as they're moving through. We have another people reporting they're not seeing tiller development, and that's probably where the research comes in, is we need to follow these plants pretty closely and see if they all tiller or don't tiller, and what phenotypes or visual symptoms do we have now that may not lead to tillering, and that hopefully this never happens again, although things have repeated themselves already. But if they do repeat themselves, we'd have a much better guideline to that replant decision in terms of, if my plants look like this, I count them as part of my total. If they look like this, I don't, and I can work on my replants and patches or whatever else. If some of them are on the fence and those lower numbers, I'd say let those fields continue, because you're gonna have losses on the replant date. That's just inevitable to corn being planted later. That's why we planted so early. But if you're in that 50 to 60%, you're not seeing tillering, I think that's justifiable that you move into a replant if your populations are low enough.
While we don't see wheat stem maggot as a problem each and every year, researchers at Nebraska Extension have been working hard to better understand when it's most likely to appear and how to best manage this pest. If you'd like to dive deeper into what they've discovered so far, go ahead and head on over to the Market Journal homepage, where we posted a link to an article to do just that. Up next, you may recall that last week we were out at the Weed Management Field Day near Clay Center, and while we were there, we got some great advice on weed control in corn, soybeans, and sorghum. We also got to see some exciting technology currently being developed out in the fields, and that includes a piece of technology by a talented UNL grad student. Here's your first look at a new AI-driven weed control solution called the See and Till.
He calls the machine behind me the See and Till. We're going to talk about it, learn all about it by the man who's created that is Amlan. He is a PhD student at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. See and Till, you've got a camera on the front of this. Walk me through what this machine does.
So this machine is a See and Till robot. So what it does, as the name goes, it kind of like identifies the weed Palmer amaranth and selectively tills them. So we have a camera in the front, and once it identifies the weed Palmer amaranth, the linear actuator would push the tiller down and kind of like grind the weed in the soil. And once it is done, it would just lift up. So it's like basically a method of targeted tillage operation. And in this, we are kind of like removing the equation of spraying from the weeding operation, so that it kind of doesn't develop herbicide resistance to any of the herbicides, because we are not using any herbicides, and that's more environmentally safe as well. So that's all the the robot is about.
Well, this is specifically targeting a curse word for ag producers, Palmer amaranth. Nobody likes that because it's becoming a little bit of herbicide resistance across fields.
Absolutely.
Talk about, you've actually had this here at the South Central Ag Lab in the fields, correct? How's it been performing?
So it has been performing quite good. I have been testing at different depths. So this is like a research platform. So I'm collecting data with how deep we can go and how much the current is required. So what's a good amount of depth that we go in which we can kill the weeds, as well as less amount of energy is being utilized on this. So far with this, we have been able to achieve like 70% accuracy with the detection. So I was testing it in very cloudy conditions. That's when I found a little bit of problem with. That's because I did not train the model with cloudy images. So I'm looking forward to collecting images of the weed Palmer amaranth in cloudy conditions, and then feed it onto the model so that it can also perform better in the cloudy conditions as well.
Over the past few years, we've seen some of this new tech in this space come to life. There's a few different versions of See and Spray, which is John Deere. Off to my left right now, we have the Green Eye system, which is all controlling seeing a weed in the field and spot spraying. What are the pros and cons of the See and Till versus the alternative methods of spot spraying?
So in spot spraying, eventually it's like you're spraying, even if it is spraying less, but you're spraying some things, and slowly and gradually the weeds would develop herbicide resistance to that also, and then you have to either increase the concentration or get some new formulations. But with this, we are just removing the spraying from the equation of weeding. So there is no spray, so it's all mechanical, and the weeds have no way to like adapt themselves to saving themselves from like blades or something. So this I feel like is the way to go, in which if it's like an organic farming, or if there is any researchers who are working on like genes or gene phenotyping and those stuff, so in which they do not want to spray their fields, so they can use these platforms to kind of do the weeding instead of like people going manually and weeding it. So this is what I feel like would be beneficial in the longer run. So slowly and gradually the weeds would be getting the amount of seeds getting onto the field would be reduced, and that would like kind of reduce the weed pressure eventually. So that's my goal for this machine.
There's always something cool to see out at those extension field days. Be sure to stay tuned to Market Journal, as we'll have much more content from the 2025 Weed Management Field Day over the next couple of weeks. Up next, it's our chance to turn our attention over to the grain markets, and joining the broadcast this week is Jeff Peterson. He's the president of Heartland Farm Partners. Let's begin today talking about the reports that came out at the start of the week. Overall, we didn't see any surprises. The market's pretty much muted. Your thoughts on that reaction?
Yeah, actually, you're exactly right. There's no real surprises there. The one thing I do want to talk about with the report that stands out that isn't getting enough attention is the fact that there was an adjustment made on harvested acres. So we saw a very slight adjustment on planted acres. Harvested acres actually came down as we looked at the last WASDE compared to what was shown in the planted acreage number, 626,000 acres. So as you go down the road, what that means is that would, reduce the production slightly. Now that by itself is not a game changer. But back to your original question on, the muted response, no, I think the response was probably appropriate. If we look at what was going on with the markets going into those reports, we had the fund short on the corn side, a slight long on the bean side. We've got good weather going on overall, so no real concerns there. Now, the weather's not perfect, but it's not perfect any year. So as soon as they got the report behind them, they go, okay, now we got to focus ahead. And they focused ahead thinking, all right, as the speculative traders, the funds, they'll continue to sell this market until they get spooked to go the other way. The other thing that's coming out and probably not getting enough attention is a South American production, in particular that safrinha corn crop. It's coming off slow. It's about 20% harvested right now, would be what our last numbers show. The thing we continue to hear is that the yields are getting bigger, so those bushels are really available out there in the marketplace, and they'll start competing more with our exports. But keep in mind, our exports are still good so far.
Okay, well, back here in America, let's talk about corn. Corn condition continues to improve, that good, excellent condition, what we watch week to week, and some analysts now starting to talk about perhaps seeing above trend yields. Do you think that's justified based on what you're seeing across the countryside?
Well, as I take a look at everything, there's definitely some problem areas out there. You take a look at Ohio, you take a look at the southern part of Indiana, southern part of Illinois, also down into the Delta. Overall, I think it's probably to raise the yield at this point, it's getting a little ahead of ourselves. What we're looking at, though, is we are running those numbers ourselves to say, okay, what would different higher yields look like, just to prepare and say, okay, what would that do to the marketplace? So I don't think you can start raising that yield yet, but here's the thing I would say. The 50% pollination time frame is going to fall somewhere between about the 13th to the 18th. As we take a look at our forecast right now, it does look pretty favorable. If we go another 2 weeks down the road with cooler than normal temperatures, or just normal temp, or maybe even just slightly above, and with the precip that's forecasted, then I think you have to start talking about raising the yield up, but I wouldn't do it quite yet.
All right, when it comes to soybeans, oftentimes we see these markets run in tandem. When corn is up, soybeans are up. You told me, though, don't look at these markets the same here in 2025. Why is that?
Yeah, so there's some big differences out there. So if you take a look at on the corn side, we've got a good sized corn crop out there. Over on the bean side, the thing that we've got is that the supply has been a little smaller, and our stocks are tight enough. We're not going to run out. But the other thing that's came about, the renewable volume obligation numbers came out, which looks like that's going to require us to go ahead and produce more biomass diesel. So that's going to use up more soybean oil, and soybean oil's had some really good strength in here. Now that's put pressure on soybean meal. In addition, this whole talk about, the big beautiful bill, that continues to move along, and the thought would be is that as we dig deep into that, that's got some good information, some good support on that 45Z that we've always been talking about, which could bring some additional support back to really the renewable fuels area. So as a result of that, we've got some really good demand on the bean side. And I think beans, as of right now, have probably a little bit better story than corn does. And then going forward, it's got a little bit more time to see what's going to happen on the weather side. Now, that could mean worse conditions or better conditions, so time will tell on that, but there definitely is a difference between the two.
All right, real quick on wheat, hearing some challenges in the state of Kansas, trying to get that crop out in Nebraska, now harvesting though, as we typically are during the 4th of July. Saw a little bit of a sign of life for the wheat complex on the charts, that is. Do you think we might have hit a bottom in that wheat market? Could go higher from here?
Yeah, I don't think we've necessarily seen a bottom yet in here. As we dig into the U.S. crop, the U.S. crop does look like it's going to get a little smaller yet here, just because we're going to have some higher than normal harvest losses. And some of that feed's going to ultimately end up making its way into basically the feed market, or some of the wheat's going to make its way into the feed market. So I think the thing that we have to look at there is that the pace that we're physically getting that crop off is really slow in many areas in Kansas. I mean, if you don't have tracks, you may not even harvest. The other story that goes right along with wheat, though, gets to be what that's going to mean for double crop soybeans. Mm-hmm. As we take a look at Kansas, Kansas produces about 880,000 bushel, or 880,000 acres of double crop beans. And there's some question marks about how much of those are actually going to end up getting planted. So that's one. Now, will that by itself, if a bunch of those acres don't get planted, will that be enough to bring the bean market up? No, on its own, that won't be enough. But it does lend some support to the bean side.
In closing, it's all about weather, seems like, moving forward. If we do see a boost in corn, soybeans, wheat prices, have to have a weather scare. Is that fair? Yeah, that's really fair. If you take a look, and over the next 2 weeks on the corn side, that's going to be very important. We got a little bit more time on the bean side. Now, some other things that could come into play, though, that we want to just keep in the back of our mind. We do want to watch and see how all these reciprocal trade deals, how they start working out. We want to keep a very close eye on what's going on with China and see whether or not we can get something done there, because we need to see them come back into the export market here soon. I want to let you know, if you do have a question for one of our future analysts, go ahead and email us or get in touch on social media so I can pass your question along. Battling convenience expenses for farm family living is among those basic strategies to get your farm family cost living under control. Maintaining a conservative family living budget on the farm helps the farm make ends meet, and that's all important, especially right now. There are many tips out there to limiting convenience items, using rewards programs for vacations, or simply living within your means. You can learn about all these strategies in the latest issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It is now time to check in with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Meteorologist Eric Hunt. Eric, once again, seen a good mix of rain and sunshine over the past 7 days. What can we expect as we turn to the week ahead?
Well, thanks, Bryce. It's going to be kind of a similar story this upcoming week. Matter of fact, the upper air pattern is quite similar to what we had this previous week, with ridging being more predominant here across the northwestern United States. And at least the first half of the week, I do expect to be multiple shortwaves coming through the northern plains into the state. That's going to bring multiple chances for precipitation, particularly for the eastern 3/4 of the state. I don't think this is going to be a robust week for precipitation across the panhandle, but I think everybody else is going to have at least a shot at getting moisture during the first half of the week. Right now, it looks like Sunday evening and Sunday night is going to be a pretty good chance of rain across west central and central portions of the state. I think as we get into Monday night and Tuesday night, probably better chances of heavier precipitation across north central and the eastern section of the state. Maybe drying off a little bit more here later in the week. I do anticipate there being additional chances for showers and storms statewide as we head toward the end of this next week. In terms of precipitation anomalies, again, we're looking at precipitation probably being above average the eastern half of the state, getting into the I-states. And that's going to be pretty good news here for Illinois. They've been a little bit on the dry side, not super dry, but they probably will welcome this moisture coming in here next week. We could also certainly use some precipitation here across portions of southeastern Nebraska that missed out. Most of the state, though, the last 10 days, we've done very well with precipitation, in some cases a little too well. CPC shows above average precipitation being favored here through the 9th through the 15th, so I do think that we're going to have a pretty good chance of getting additional showers and thunderstorms statewide with another cold front coming in later this next week. In terms of temperatures, again, we're going to be cooling off on Sunday, so probably, I think, starting Sunday, probably for at least 8 to 10 days, we're looking at highs being predominantly in the 80s for most of the state. Exception will be here in the Panhandle. I do think as we head to later portion of the week, probably going to be getting the 90s for highs, but for the most of us, so probably staying in the 80s for highs and dropping off in the 60s for lows. So that's very good news for pollination. I do think a lot of the crops will be hitting that here in the next week or so. This is relatively ideal conditions for pollination here across the Midwest. Temperatures likely remaining below average here through about the middle of July. Warmer to our north and west, so again, probably a little bit cooler here toward the southeastern portion of the state, warmer as you go toward the northwest. Getting a little bit deeper in the crystal ball, the CPC shows warmer than average favorite here across most of the country. I do think as we head past July 15th, particularly closer to July 20th and toward the later portion of the month, I do think the heat pressure is going to pick up, particularly on the overnight lows. I'm not necessarily saying that we're going to have major heat waves coming up here, but I would anticipate probably getting more days in the 90s with more overnight lows in the 70s as we head toward the latter portion of July. I also think that we're probably not going to shut the faucet off entirely the back half of the month, but I do anticipate the precipitation chances getting a little bit less frequent as we head toward the back half of the month. And again, it's going to be very critical that we get additional moisture here across portions of southern Nebraska in the next week to 10 days. This is an area looking at a little bit longer term. We still have a lot of drought conditions. We've made some improvements recently, but this is an area that would go over back to being pretty dry very, very quickly if we don't get some decent precipitation. Grass gas shows that as long as we get reasonably good precipitation here in the next couple of months, there is a reasonable chance above average forage production, exception being here across portions of southwestern Nebraska. And what a fun week it was last week across the state of Nebraska. Back to you, Bryce.
Thanks for that update, Eric. We do appreciate it. Up next, nitrogen fertilizer remains one of the biggest expenses for Nebraska producers, especially when it comes to growing corn. In situations like this, it's important to use nitrogen wisely and make every pound count. Market Journal's Bill Dodd is standing by with this story. Bill?
Starting off the growing season came with a developing challenge for corn producers this year: a nitrogen fertilizer shortage, specifically liquid urea ammonium nitrate. This shortage has the potential to disrupt availability and pricing throughout the remainder of the growing season, and has risen out of a combination of logistic and market issues.
For example, the first one is during last fall there was a dry weather that delayed the nitrogen fertilizer application till this spring, which spiked the demand for nitrogen fertilizer during the early spring. And this actually coincided with the unexpected shutdown of some nitrogen production facilities. And there was also less import of nitrogen fertilizer. So, but at the same time, there was more export of the nitrogen fertilizer, which resulted in tightening of the domestic nitrogen fertilizer supply. So overall, because of these issues, there has been more nitrogen fertilizer sold for July, March and July shipment, and then now the retailers are looking for fertilizer for June and July, which is a period when there is a lot of nitrogen fertilizer through the liquid nitrogen fertilizer in Nebraska.
While this isn't an ideal situation for anyone to be in, if you're looking to ensure your operation isn't too greatly impacted by these supply disruptions, there are some strategic considerations you can take under advisement in order to take a more proactive approach to the current scenario.
So yes, producers can take some proactive and strategic approach for managing the nitrogen. For example, first of all, they can have some early communication and more frequent communication with their local supplier to get an idea of the availability of nitrogen fertilizer and the timely delivery of those fertilizer. And then they can also look for some substitutes or alternative nitrogen fertilizers like granular urea or anhydrous ammonia. Those are some of the options that farmers can use, but those fertilizers are normally used at the start of the season. So for that, what we recommend the farmers to also use enhanced efficiency nitrogen fertilizers like urease inhibitor or nitrification inhibitor with those fertilizers, because as you apply these enhanced efficiency for nitrogen fertilizer with those fertilizers, those tends to retain nitrogen for a longer period of time and reduce the nitrogen losses. So at the same time, when the producers would be managing the nitrogen fertilizer with these ways, this can help to improve the nitrogen management and crop performance.
If you do find yourself impacted by this shortage, it's more important than ever for producers to use nitrogen wisely and make each application count as much as possible. With that in mind, there are several techniques you can incorporate into your operation to help protect your pocketbook and your yield.
So we have our digital nitrogen calculator that helps farmers to calculate economic optimum nitrogen rate. So that helps to align the crop nitrogen needs with the nitrogen inputs. And then at the same time, the farmers can pick the right source, the source that can help them to meet the nitrogen needs with the crop nitrogen requirement. And again, as I mentioned earlier, enhanced efficiency fertilizers are one of the options that they can use if they are putting nitrogen early in the season, so that the nitrogen can stay for a longer period of time with minimal losses. And then we also recommend the farmers to account the nitrogen credits, nitrogen that is already there in the soil in the form of nitrate nitrogen. And then also nitrogen credit if they have applied manure, nitrogen credit from natural soil organic mineralization, and nitrogen credit from irrigation that they are going to apply during the season. And then another strategy is to split apply nitrogen during the growing season. That is really one of the best way to match the nitrogen needs at the right time during the growing season with minimal nitrogen losses. And then we have several precision tools available, or decision support tool available for the farmers that can help them to decide how much nitrogen they need to apply during the growing season. Among those top practices, those are the kind of major practices that we recommend to the farmers. And at the last, I would say that they can always connect with our extension team, extension specialists or extension educators. Those are always willing to help them to find the right tool to manage the nitrogen during the growing season.
The current UAN shortage is a tough situation. However, it's also an opportunity to fine-tune nitrogen management on your operation. By utilizing precision applications and other techniques, producers can protect yields and reduce costs, helping them maintain profitability and sustainability over the course of the growing season. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Now, if you'd like to learn more about nitrogen savings, well, you're in luck. Next week on Wednesday, July 9th, Nebraska Extension will be hosting the 4 Hours Field Day at the Eastern Nebraska Research Extension Education Center, which is located near Meade. That event is free, but they are asking for you to register. We've added a link to that registration page along with this story over the Market Journal homepage. Well, folks, that is just about all the time we have for this week's show. If you did miss one of our stories, we encourage you to follow and like Market Journal on social media. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel. We hope to see you right back here next time. But until then, I'm Bryce, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.